We've talked in the past how I've begun to get back into the world of board games. And when I say get back, I lying probably. I mean, it's not really get back. I haven't played board games in my childhood. I've played board games, but I haven't played it in recent years, and I haven't really played serious good board games. I played Monopoly when I was a kid. You know, it doesn't really count. I've been getting to know this world and how deep and vast and massive it is, because there's so many games of so many different types that it boggles the mind. And I'm really, really enjoying getting introduced to it. The events that I go to are really wonderful, because not only there's a big library of games, but there's also a ton of people willing to play it. And in order to play a board game, you need to physically have it, first of all, and then you need people who are willing to play it, and hopefully and luckily with these events, someone willing to teach it. Because if you don't have anyone to teach you, it's a little bit harder and not as fun to get into a game, especially the deep ones, and trust me, there are ones that are insanely deep. But if there's someone to teach you, that's it, the barriers to learning and to getting into it are just lowered amazingly well. And it's been a pleasure so far, and I want to talk about a couple of them. I want to give you my highly uneducated, very unexperienced recommendations of games that I've managed to play, most of them at least, a couple of times. And the important part here is that I've played them a couple of times and I still want to play them more. And that's really the kicker here. I've played some games and I was like, okay, I get this, or I get this enough, and I'm not really interested in it. I don't want to play it again. It was okay, but I'm not really excited about playing it again. The games that I want to show you today are games that I played and I'm still excited to play again. I want more. I want to understand the game better, and I want to succeed at the game more, and I want to play it with new people and see where it takes me. So these are games that I'm actually excited about playing still after playing them, and that's something I believe, and which is where we're going to talk about them. So I got them lined up here. They're all open on Board Game Geek. Board Game Geek is probably one of the biggest board game websites, and they have ratings and they have information about everything, and I just wanted to show you so we could talk a little bit about, you could see how it looks, and you'd have the name and everything. So Board Game Geek is pretty good. The first one we're going to talk about is called Hanavi, and it's probably the one that I'm going to talk about the most, because it's one of the games that I love the most. It's really, it captured me quite extensively. I've played this quite a bunch of times, and luckily it's also one of the shorter games. It's a game that you get into very quickly, and then it also ends pretty quickly. It's not one of those couple of hour games. It's just a bunch of cards. And what's unique about it is that, first of all, it's a cooperative game, so you're playing with everybody else. But it's a card game that you hold the cards, but you don't see the cards. Everybody else sees your cards. So the back of the cards is actually to you. And I'm not going to go through all of the rules here, because that will be insane, but even though Hanabi doesn't have too many rules. But still, we're not going to go through all the rules. The main point of the game is that through hints and seeing everybody else's cards, and there is a very specific amount of cards in the game, so by seeing everybody else's, you can deduce what you hold in your hand. You're supposed to, along with everyone else, get the correct series of cards down on the board in, obviously, the correct order. And if you manage to do all of it, then you have a perfect game. If you screw up in the middle, you might not have a perfect game. And if you really screw up, you might just end up losing, which is probably the worst thing that could happen. That personally has never happened to me. It's pretty difficult to downright lose, but it is also incredibly difficult to get a perfect game going. I've never done a perfect game so far. I've reached pretty close to it, but I've never had a perfect game. So what really is remarkable about it is that you give hints to other people, and until you manage to get the game into your head, and this takes a while and everybody gets it a little bit differently. Every time you play with new people, it's completely different, because they give you a hint and you're not entirely sure why they gave you that hint. Did they give you the hint so you'd put the card down, or so that you would burn the card? And when you burn a card, you actually get an additional hint. So there's a limit to the amount of hints that you could throw around until you have to burn cards in order to get additional hints. But you could also put cards down. It's a really clever game, and you have to constantly be aware of what's on the board, what has been burned, what does everybody else have, and remembering every hint that you've gotten. So if they tell me this card is a 4, I know that this card is a 4, but I also know that all the other cards in my hand aren't a 4. So every hint gives you full information. And this is it's memory plus understanding what everything, all the cards that you know, and understanding the hints that people give you. Remarkable game, really. I love Hanavi, and I just want to play more of it with more people. It's actually one of the games where I want to play with people who've never played before, which usually you don't do. You want to play with people who know the game, so it'll be an interesting game. But no, Hanabi is really easy to teach, and I want to play with people that have never played before because the game is going to just be really weird, and it's going to be really cool to try and figure out and understand each other, because eventually you're trying to win against the game. It's a cooperative game. Hanabi is one of my favorites, and I've spent the most time talking about it, so let's get through the other ones a little bit quicker, hopefully. All right, so Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is quite a little bit of an older game. It's from 2002, and I've been told it's a classic, and playing it a couple of times, damn, it seems like a classic. It's a much more heavier game. It's not the super ultra heavy game, but it is a pretty heavy game. It's pretty serious. You have to really think about what you want to do, and what really comes into play here is the fact that each player in your turn, you pick one of the roles on the board. And then you do that roll. And then everybody else goes through the same roll. So you get a bonus for that roll because you picked it, but everybody else also do that roll. And the thing is that these rolls kind of have a sequence to them. So if you do this roll, it makes a lot of sense for the next player to maybe want to do this roll, and then the other player after him to do the third roll in the sequence, for example. So if you pick something, you have to really think ahead. You have to think, if I do this, what will this make the other players do? Because you might see, hey, this is pretty good for me right now, but then the next roll that the person after you will take will give him a huge bonus, a much bigger bonus than what you just got. And the point is to get the biggest amount of victory points. I mean, the game ends with the person who has the most victory points. That's the person who wins. So if you're doing something that's good for you but way better for others, you're going to lose. And it creates an incredibly interesting dynamic. It's a really deep game, and I've really enjoyed playing Puerto Rico. It's a wonderful game. You should check it out. That's Puerto Rico. Moving forward to games that are a little bit easier and simpler to digest. Kingsburg, I've only played like once or twice, and it's a rolling dice game. So you roll the dice and whatever happens, happens. But it's not that much in that sense. You still need to think, what am I going to do with the roll that I just got? And you have all kinds of options. You have options of affecting that. And it comes down to a pretty interesting game. It is still rolling dice. So it is still, if someone gets a perfect roll, someone gets an 18 or a really good roll that they specifically need on the board, then, well, they kind of got the advantage. But you could still affect it, and it still has a couple of elements that are pretty nice to it. I haven't played a ton of it, but I think it's interesting. I still want to play a couple more times of it and see how deep it goes. I enjoyed Kingsburg quite a lot. Next is Ticket to Ride. This is one of the railroad games. Apparently, it's a thing. Trains and board games. Apparently, it's a thing. I didn't know. But there's a ton of these, apparently. And this one is one of the most chill, simple ones. What I've been told, when I was introduced to this by the guys at MIT when I was at MIT, was Ticket to Ride is not an incredibly deep game. You won't completely fall in love with it, but it is impossible to hate. And you know what? I really believe that. After playing it a good couple of times, I really believe it's impossible to hate because it's just a nice game. It's fun. It goes through... there's a couple of strategies that you could think of. You could maybe collect a bunch of cards and then do your things, or you could just try and get exactly what you need and then do that, which maybe doesn't make entire sense to you right now, but you could play whenever you want. On your turn, you could play stuff, and you could collect as many cards as you want in your hand. So if you place things immediately when you get them, then you're just gonna be left with a lot of cards that don't do anything. But if you just collect a ton and then use it, you might know exactly what you're doing, but trains and tracks have already been taken by other players. So you have to kind of balance that through. And it's a nice little game. I enjoyed Ticket to Ride. There's also a ton of boards, which is one of the cool things. There's a ton of boards in Ticket to Ride. You could play, and the board really doesn't matter that much as long as it's relatively balanced. So just get whatever Ticket to Ride, USA, Europe, Asia, it doesn't matter, and just play it. And it's really, it's a cute game. I enjoy Ticket to Ride. And lastly, we're going to talk about Mage Knight. There's not a lot of games here, told you. Mage Knight is a category onto its own. This is not the super deep game. It's the super ultra, holy crap, what the hell, why have we been playing for 6 hours deep kind of game. This is the deepest the rabbit hole goes. It's insane. Mage Knight is just... and trying to contextualize this a little bit, I don't know if you're familiar with miniature games, but this was originally a miniature game. They're very complex, and they turned it into a board game. There's so much in here. Basically, in its core, you go on an adventure. You go on an adventure in a fantasy setting, and there are so many things that affect you. There's very little luck involved in this game. There's some luck in it. Actually, the first time that people told me that you could compare this to Talisman. Talisman is a really renowned game. Not sure if you know it, but it's a really renowned game that is basically a fantasy adventure. You pick a character and you go on a fantasy adventure. But Talisman is completely 100% random. It is just you roll a dice, you see what happens. And this is like, you take Talisman, but you make it not random and mature and awesome and amazing, and you get Mage Knight, something that is so incredibly complex. Just learning this game for the first time will take you as much time as it is to play one of the other games. I mean, you could play a round of Kingsburg or Ticket to Ride in the time it takes you to learn Mage Knight. You really need someone who knows this game. I mean, it's also, I don't own it myself, but I would play it on my own. There's actually different scenarios you can actually play solo, and it's still interesting and cool and awesome. That's how great this game is. But really, you need someone who owns this, first of all. It's a pretty big game. It costs quite a lot. And you need someone who knows the game. If you find someone like that, just tell him, hey, want to play Mage Knight? And he'll say yes, because it's an amazing game. But you need to clear out like 6-7 hours. I actually had a game that took 7 hours playing Mage Knight. And that's because everybody was terrible. It was their first time. But yeah, that's the amount of time it takes. This is the deepest. But it is so worth it, because this is so incredibly cool. This is totally my childhood, doing, playing Talisman as a kid, fantasy setting. This is what I wanted Talisman to be. But Talisman was like rolling the dice, seeing what happens. Mage Knight is the coolest thing ever. And it's a commitment, though. It's a commitment. So yeah, those are the games that I'm recommending right now, that I've played a little bit. Uneducated, unexperienced, a little bit of game time. But I really enjoyed them. And again, as I said, I'm looking forward to playing them again. So there must be something there, I hope. Or at least that's what I draw on from all of my experience as a person who loves games, and mostly digital games, and designs games, and thinks about games all the time. So those are the board games that I enjoyed the most. And I've clearly played a lot of others, some that I didn't enjoy that much. But these are probably the highlights I'd like to say. So yeah, that's it for now. Join me again in a year or something while I have more information and could recommend more stuff. Probably, maybe, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Well, in any case, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.